When you're trying to craft your personal brand, the best thing that you can do is to be different. Different is better than being better. And I'm now breathing heavy. I think I'm starting to sweat. Not because of that movement, but because it's getting real right now. Heart palpitations and all. And the guy in front of me looks disgusted. Stories or memories are just emotions and stories together. Those three things are intertwined. You can't have a memory without a story and an emotion. And a story without emotion is not a memory. It stirs something within you.
What if the secret to building unforgettable personal brand isn't what you say, but what you give away? Today, we're speaking with Chris Do, a globally recognized Emmy winner, entrepreneur, and educator. Chris has built a personal brand with a massive following and a thriving business. You'll have the tools to make your unique stories the foundation of a personal brand that truly resonates. Ready to find out how? I'm your host, Ryan McPherson, and this is the Storytelling Movement Podcast. Chris, welcome to the show. Please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do.
Hi, Ryan. My name is Chris Do, and I'm a loud introvert, a serial entrepreneur, and a recovering graphic designer. I have this really big mission, which is to teach 1 billion people how to make a living doing what they love.
Why do you do what you do? Why is that something that's important to you?
Great question. I do what I do because I think there's a certain part in my life, a certain season where I was really about trying to make as much as I can to do the very best work that I can do to provide for myself and for my family and for the people I care about. And at some point I get to this place where I feel like I have enough. And now I wonder what I'm going to do with the rest of my life. I could go off into the sunset and retire, or I can create another job for myself, or maybe I can do something that is more an act of generosity to try to help other people along their way to achieve some part of their dream.
We've noticed you give so much away for free. Is there a strategy to that?
I never know how to answer this question, Ryan, because if I had my way, I would just give everything I have away for free and hope that everyone will just take care of our expenses. So I have a small team. As long as I can pay them a decent, livable wage, I don't really need to make that much. This whole endeavor is not about making money. But fortunately, when you give things away for free, people don't always value that. They don't always implement it, and they don't see it as valuable to them. And so they don't necessarily reciprocate that value back to me. And so then we have to figure out ways to make some money. And so a lot of the stuff that we do is totally free. There's some stuff that's behind a paywall. You enroll in the course or group coaching community. And people always ask me, what's the difference between your free content and the stuff we pay for? And my honest answer is not a lot. And there's a real reason. And people kind of find that off-putting because they think, well, shouldn't the paid stuff be way more premium? Shouldn't it be very different? And I said, well, if I did that, wouldn't that be a bait and switch situation? Or maybe I'm gatekeeping content, and I don't like to do that. So I teach in full transparency. I do it with all of my effort in earnest, and I want people to learn from that. My theory on this is if I give you free stuff, you grow, you make money, and then maybe at some point you'll feel so compelled, maybe out of guilt or whatever, or just appreciation, that you go in and buy something that we make so that you can support what we do. And so I don't know how to always decide this is going to be something we're going to charge money for, or this is going to be something we want to give away for free.
I know that I have personally benefited, not just from my business, but my professional growth has benefited greatly from what you've given away for free and being a part of your business boot camp. And taking that course really helped me to dive into exactly what I wanted to change about my business. And so I know I am among many that are incredibly appreciative for the work that you're doing. Are there certain things that you do that set you apart from other people? Because I know a lot of people are out there trying to build their personal brand online, but they're not as successful as you. They're not able to replicate the kind of success that you've been able to achieve. So what are the things that set you apart, and what advice would you give to people who are trying to build this personal brand?
This is a big question that you're asking me, Ryan. So let's try and unpack all of this stuff. Let's first answer the easy question as to what people are doing wrong when they're trying to build their personal brand. I think people use the word personal brand a little loosely without really understanding what it is, because it seems to be very much part of the zeitgeist right now. We see people, celebrities or semi-celebrities, create tremendous wealth for themselves doing multi-million, multi-billion dollar deals. And we all look at that and say, wow, I want a piece of that. And who doesn't want a piece of that? If they're handing that out, I want that. But what people are doing is they're really going on social media using it as a marketing and advertising platform to sell the services, products, or something else. And it's this constant interruptive pattern of advertising or marketing to me that I think, if that's your personal brand, I'm not interested at all. And so there's a mix, I think, between giving away value for free, showing up authentically as who you are, inviting people into your life, your victories and your defeats, your failures and everything in between. And also trying to manage a business. So we're trying to figure out these two things. Whenever somebody comes to me and says, Chris, I want to work on my personal brand. How come it's not working? I quickly look through their feed and say, it's all advertising. Where are you in any of this? How are you doing this as an act of generosity to help other people with no expectations? And then it goes pretty quiet. It becomes pretty self-evident at this point. So what you're doing is you're taking all the time and you're asking, why aren't people giving me anything? Well, because you have your hands up the entire time. There's this idea, this belief that I have that Jose Caballé, my former business partner from the school, shared with me. He goes, Chris, what you're doing, you believe in this idea called karmic equity. And karmic equity works in the way that when you give things away, when you show up generously to serve other people, the account grows bigger. Your equity compounds with interest over time. And every time you ask for something, you take away, you kind of zero out that count. So what we're doing in our lives in online and offline is we're creating goodwill. So if you help out your partner, your husband, your wife, your children, they say, Ryan's a great guy. I'm lucky to be around him. I like him. And whenever I can think of doing something to help him back, because we don't want to always be takers. We want to level out the scale of equity, right? So what we're going to do is like, I'll pick you up at the airport, Ryan. Or they'll say, hey, I just bought a bunch of books and I think you might like some of them. So here. And you're, wow, that's awesome. And then your friendship grows. And sometimes it can grow into a deep friendship. It can become your best friend. And if you do this at scale, they become part of your community and they show up for you because you show up for them. To me, that's what it's really about. It's less about communicating and marketing externally. It's about this journey of going inward and figuring out who you are, what makes you you, and sharing that with the world to say, hey, does anybody else feel the same way? Do we believe the same things? Do we care about the same things? And if we do, let's have a conversation. And if you do that consistently and play this over a long period of time, I think you have a pretty good shot of building a brand and a reputation that people like and they show up for and they eagerly anticipate. There's a test here. And the test is if you stop pumping out your marketing messages or your content, if you will call it that, and no one misses it, I don't think you have a brand at all.
You covered a lot there, but one thing that stood out to me was this idea of value and making sure that you have a unique value proposition in your content. How does that work? What does that look like? And are there other things in that mix beyond giving value?
Everybody in their lives are going along a journey and they eventually hit some kind of barrier, a challenge, a pain point, and they experience this pain deeply. And sometimes it's physical pain, like you might have tweaked an ankle, your eye might be hurting, something like that. A lot of times it's emotional or psychological pain that you're feeling, unresolved childhood trauma. And you're not quite sure what to do. You're not even sure that there's a solution to the problem you have, or maybe that you even have a problem at all. And if someone understands this, understands you and says, I've been down this road and I was able to do this and this got rid of my pain, I'd like to share it with you. And if what they share is valuable to you, that you're able to transform to create some kind of positive change and go from a state of pain to a state of like joy or delight, then I think you would define that as valuable. And it doesn't have to be this seismic thing that you're creating. It could just be somebody's feeling down. Somebody's feeling like, you know what, I've had a couple bad string of events happen in my life and I'm just not feeling myself in this moment. You come across one of your videos. Maybe it's just you dancing or you cooking or eating something amazing. And they just see that and it lights them up. And they can say, well, that's valuable to me because you moved me from a negative state to a positive state. And it could be as simple as that.
That's an excellent breakdown of value. There are other things that are principles that help us to move our personal brand forward. What are those things? I've heard you talk about consistency and authenticity, for example. You break those down?
Authenticity is a word that we use a lot, just like personal branding. And it's a word that I don't think a lot of people understand because, well, who's not authentic? And why is it that we even have to talk about being yourself? And so there's some theories that I have, and it's backed up by other people talking about similar things, people more studied and well-researched. And what they talk about is we're socialized to fit into the pack, because to stand apart is a psychologically or emotionally unsafe thing to do. If we think back to junior high, some of those awkward years that we had, it was like, if we're not part of the cool kids crowd, we're kind of on the outside, and it sucks. I've been there. I've been there most of my young adult life. And I think, gosh, I just would like to be left alone, to feel like I'm not such a social pariah. And it kind of hurts. And so what we do is we change ourselves to fit in. And there's an expression, we go along to get along. And if you practice this over a number of years, you start to realize something. Well, who am I now? And it's like this existential crisis that we have in our mid 40s and 50s. Like, we've been doing everything that someone else told us to do. We studied something in school because mom and dad wanted that. We went to a certain college because society told us it was prestigious. We pursued a career in X because that was the thing to do. And then we go through this process and the system, if you will. And then we wake up one day and we realize, like, well, who am I? We're looking in the mirror and we don't recognize the person that we see looking back at us. And so that's the real dilemma. And so when we say we need to be authentic, it means that who are you when you strip away everything, the accolades, the job, the education? Who are you when no one's watching? I'm talking about creating this persona to be accepted. And what I mean is, there's the true self and then there's the persona. For example, if you're at work and you're generally just a pretty quiet, reserved person, but you think in order to get a promotion, to be seen as a leader, you have to command a certain personality. You become more assertive and aggressive, and you make demeaning comments to certain groups of people, whether it's their gender, their race, their religion, or something else, just because that's the social norm. And that is you fighting against your true authentic self. And this happens a lot on social media. What happens is, as far as I can see, is that we curate our lives so much so because we think if we show up as ourselves, people will attack us. They'll criticize us. They'll ridicule us. And that is too much pain for people to feel at this moment. So they keep pretending to be somebody. And that's the biggest problem, I think. So once you get over the authenticity part, like, you're on the road to something wonderful because you are now self-aware. You know how people see you. You know how you see yourself, and you're okay with that. So that would lead you to self-acceptance. And if you keep doing this enough, I think self-acceptance becomes self-confidence or self-confident. And that's a beautiful thing to have. I mean, it's a gift that I wish I could just package up and give to each single person, because you're a whole different person when you learn to love yourself, when you become your own number one fan.
I remember one of the business boot camp modules was about mindset and developing this kind of resilience. I would love if you could connect that to consistency, because I think these concepts are so interrelated and so important when people are trying to launch their personal brand.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we touch on in the mindset module business bootcamp is getting the right frame. Like, we know that there's objective reality in absolute truth, and then there's subjective reality and perceived truth, and there's worlds apart. So you and I, we can experience something with 100 other people, and each one of us could have our truth of what we experience. There might be very little objective truth in there. And we walk around with these thoughts, these values, these beliefs, unquestioned. Like, we just leave them alone. We think this must be absolute truth. So when somebody else says something to us and it goes against what it is that we believe, sometimes those are fighting words. And we don't even examine what it is that we believe. We just want to defend it. So in that module, we talk a lot about examining your own belief system, to sit there and look at it objectively, like to take your ideas and put them on the table and examine it from a third-party neutral perspective and see, where did this idea come from? When did I learn this? And who did I learn it from? We start to unpack all those parts and see, wow, that's interesting, because I picked that idea up when I was 5, when I didn't know anything. And the person who told me, I think they were trying to protect me, but now it's made me fearful of a lot of things, and it's not serving me well today. That in my adult mind, if someone had told me this, I probably would have rejected it. So we have to learn to think critically and challenge those ideas. And it's about just understanding the frame. And, one of the exercises that we do is we say, congratulations. When something bad happens to us, we try to reframe. Now, I've come upon a psychologist by the name of Dr. DeMartini, and he says there's no such thing as a purely good or purely bad experience, that all experiences have both good and bad in them. That when something bad happens to you, you have to ask yourself this question, which is, what is the benefit of this happening? So let's say you have a former business partner or a business partner that you find out isn't holding up their end of the bargain. And you get into this long, emotionally drawn out legal battle and you split the business or something like that. You have to say, look, that was a miserable experience. And you're going to hold on to that hate and that anger, or you can say, well, what was the benefit of this? And try to write down 100 things until you can find the benefit. Because what happens is, at least in my case, this is sort of made up here, but I did have a partnership breakup. But it allowed me to find my own voice, to create my own company, to see if I can do it. And that journey has been wonderful. So I would have never traded the kind of tumultuous period of our relationship, because what I got from the other side was so much better. And that's what I mean.
And you just demonstrated taking a part of your life and sharing it authentically in a way that would help other people and give them value. So you're connecting concepts in your answer here, which I really appreciate, because it's exciting to see the practice on top of the principles. What connects visibility and engagement to personal branding? How are those things interrelated, and what does that look like?
When you say visibility, what do you mean by that, Ryan? Can you use more specific terms?
In Business Bootcamp, again, this is one of my reference points because I enjoyed the course so much. I was trying to niche down and make sure that I was covering just one thing, because I teach so many things. I'm teaching podcasting now, personal branding, I'm teaching persuasion, I'm teaching all these things. But if you don't niche down, you won't reach the visibility. And so for me, it was incredibly useful to do some of the exercises in that module, specifically the T-chart, I remember, where you list the things that you've been doing. I don't know why I didn't see before, but for like 20 years I had been teaching, and it turns out that skill set was a much better place to position myself. And I didn't know that until I was able to do those exercises and take that part of the course. So when I say visibility, what I mean is the right people at the right place at the right time.
There's a general thing within creative people that we crave variety. Like, variety is the spice of life, and doing the same thing over and over again makes Jack a dull boy. We understand that. And so what we wind up doing is we become like surface dwellers. We dabble, we try things out, but we don't really go that deep. And then there's the inverse of that, which are the deep divers, who really go to the bottom and find out like where the source code is, and they spend a lot of time there. And when I say a lot of time, it's all relative to how you learn, how you consume. And when they come back to the surface, there's like this big burst of energy, and they're able to figure something out because they've had a breakthrough. And so when we wind up skimming along as a surface dweller, we can connect a lot of different ideas together. And this is good if you're a strategist, because you need to have a little bit of information about a lot of different things so you can connect things, because you're really just facilitating at that point. But if you want to be known as an expert, I think you have to have at least one core area of expertise. And until you figure that out for yourself, and then you can communicate that to other people, people have a really hard time figuring out what box they should put you in. And it's not fair to put anybody in a box, but our mind being what it is, everything's competing for our attention, and we don't want to increase someone's mental processing because we can't articulate to them what it is that we do and how we can help. So when you identify that core thing that you are really good at doing, and it should be connected to the things that you're very passionate about, that helps to fuel your fire, then people can say, whoa, I didn't know Ryan did this. You made it a lot easier for me to put what you do into a box in my mind so I can remember it. Now, you as a human being can have way more complicated things than the one thing that you present. But by presenting that so clearly, so succinctly, now people know how to reach out to you, why they should reach out to you, and who to recommend you to, because you made it easier for them.
What are some of the other challenges that we see people struggling with again and again when they're trying to develop their personal brand?
They think short term instead of long term. So when they go on a platform, initially there's that rush and you get a lot of results, but over time it starts to wane and you're like, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't know about you, Ryan, but I think we've crossed our 200th podcast episode, and I think I'm just getting started right now. And there are people who create 20 and then say, no one's showing up, no one cares, I can't get the big guests on. It's just because you haven't played the game long enough. And we know that through repetition, if you make intentional practice, if you apply yourself to say, what can I do? What's 1% that I can do better each and every time I go out there? you're going to be really good by the time you hit your 100th or 200th episode. I think that's the thing that people don't look at. So they're just saying like, oh, short-term reward not here, on to the next thing. And they just keep doing this over and over again. In fact, there's a really great book written by Seth Godin on this called The Dip. And I think he presents it as a very simple and easy to understand concept, which is when you commit yourself to do something, you should never quit. But if you're not sure, quit quick. Like get out of it fast. Because there's this thing that happens with most of what we try to do in life. There's that initial rush, everything's fun, and then you dip into the valley. And it's not fun to be there because you're putting in a lot of effort and energy, but you're not getting a lot of results. So you feel like, oh, what a drag. Why am I doing this? So initially, like you might be okay at pickleball or tennis or something else. And then you're like, everybody's beating me now. I don't know what's going on. So you quit and you go on to the next thing. And that cycle repeats itself. But those people who could stick it out, get past that valley and start to ascend to the other side, they achieve something that very few people can achieve. They have success and expertise in a field. And there aren't a lot of people around because it's really difficult to get there. If you think about like a PhD, most people don't have a PhD. And the people who can achieve that are in a rare group of people. And because it's rare, it's scarce, and scarce things are valuable. This is the mind shift that we need to have such that we can achieve meaningful things.
I, again, am in a position to say thank you because about 2 years ago, publicly said, Ryan, why aren't you starting your podcast? Start your podcast. And you really were very firm in the way that you delivered this message. And it was just the kick that I needed to get started. And since then, not only professionally with my career in teaching have I seen amazing benefits, but the act of podcasting has been so much fun because it's like professional development that never ends. And I love meeting people. I love networking. I love every bit of it. So thank you for that, which brings us to podcasting since you mentioned it. What are the things that people need to do to grow their show? And what does that look like?
There are a couple of strategies. I think when you look at the landscape of podcasters, there's a couple different types. I think at the very top, in terms of production, effort, energy, and resources, there are shows like Radiolab, well-researched, takes months, maybe sometimes a year to produce one episode, a whole team of people, and it's very expensive to make. The same can be said about This American Life. Then there's the narration ones like True Crime, where they do a lot of research and they're just geeking out over it and they retell stories. And it's mostly just a monologue and them talking to you. And we're kind of enraptured with the suspense and the drama that's created by listening to true crime. I think there's another category, and we'll call this the Joe Rogan experience, the JRE experience, where a person who's vastly curious and interested in lots of different things, who has many interesting points of view themselves, have guests and they just have a conversation. And those episodes could be hours long conversation that are barely edited. Those are the kinds of pieces of content I'm more interested in, where it's very conversational and we strip away the talking points and the posturing and we just get to know the person. I enjoy that very much, and in allowing the conversation to meander where it goes. And I guess I can't be too wrong because I believe he has the #1 most listened to podcast in the world, with over 5 million downloads per episode or something like that. Some staggering number. I would just love a small fraction of that. 1/5 of that would be amazing to me. So we first have to identify what is it that we like to do. We want to produce these things. Do we have the resources? Well, if you don't go that route of Radiolab or This American Life. If you're a researcher and you're a storyteller, that's your jam, do that. If you're a conversationalist, do that. And let's just say that most of the podcasts that I am on are like fit into category 3. It's conversational. What I would suggest that most people do is move away from over researching and having prepared questions that you can't be present to the dialogue that's going on. And this is a real problem because oftentimes I'm on podcasts, they have a list of questions. I'll say something and they're like, okay. And then question number 2 is, and then question number 3 is, so I feel like I can say your hair's on fire, your nose looks like a clown. And they would say, hey, thank you, Chris. And now question number 4. That doesn't make any sense to me. Like, what are we doing here? We're supposed to have a conversation. I just revealed something about myself that I thought was emotionally vulnerable. And you're like, okay, what's the next thing we need to talk about? So I'll call those checklist podcasters. They just go down a checklist and it's not very fun or interesting. I'm not sure if it's good for the audience, and you definitely, at least from a guest point of view, it's no fun for me at all. So work on asking great questions, being a really good listener, and allowing yourself the freedom having the confidence to let the conversation go where it needs to go.
When I first started, I was glued to my question list. So I wish I had that advice before I had started. But getting started is one of the most important things, right? You learn from those kinds of mistakes. I know
Yeah.
podcasting is very interrelated with storytelling, even in these kinds of conversational podcasts. What does that look like on a podcast that is conversational like this one?
In terms of storytelling is a little bit harder to do in a conversational podcast unless the podcaster asks you a question which elicits a story from the person and they express interest in wanting to hear it. So oftentimes, I think what happens is people are asking mostly for advice or definitions. And so you try to answer that question in the way it was asked, and there isn't a ton of room for stories.
I know you have many powerful stories. Can you think of one of the most powerful stories that you've shared in the business bootcamp kind of context where people are trying to grow their personal brand that people could really take home and remember today?
When you're trying to craft your personal brand, the best thing that you can do is to be different. Different is better than being better. And this sounds really weird, especially coming from a creative person, because it's the pursuit of the perfect pixel, that everything is lined up exactly the way you think it is. Every word is scripted so perfectly that it becomes an error-free production. And I think part of that pursuit steals away from your authenticity of who you are and something that we can find relatable in ourselves. So I think when people see people who are too perfect, they just feel like you're kind of not for me, and maybe you're hiding something and you're trying too hard and it's off-putting. And plus, it's just not relatable. Like, I didn't grow up with wealthy parents. I'm not part of the dominant culture in the country I live in. I didn't have an Ivy League education. I don't have perfect teeth. I'm not the perfect height, shape, and size. And so you're kind of boring to me. There's Pixar's 22 Rules of Storytelling. I think they're the world's most successful movie studio. And rule number one is they say the audience admires characters more for the struggles than for their success. So when you hold back some of your struggles, the things that you kind of are just trying to keep it together, I think you become super unrelatable. And this is where I'm going to pivot to somebody that I normally don't talk about, and that's Miss Taylor Swift. I don't describe myself as a Swiftie, but I admire everything that she does. And her Eras tour had just broken all kinds of records. They literally shake the ground, her audience, in terms of like a seismic reaction. That is pretty cool to me. So I watched the Eras tour, the film that was, I think was on Disney or one of the streaming networks. And I watch how she can simultaneously be a global superstar who's a pretty good looking woman in decent shape. And she can still be, I think, the woman next door, which is wild. So she could be your best friend. She could be your mom. She could be your daughter. And she could be everything in between. And it's really neat how she comes on stage and she tells a little story in between each song and she sets it up as if none of this wasn't already perfectly scripted. But the way that she delivers it, she goes, every time I record an album, I usually go on tour because it's a part of the journey for me. But the last couple of albums, and you can feel the energy of the audience going crazy, I wasn't able to go on tour. So I was wondering, and they're like, all right, they're like about to explode out of their mind, right? I was wondering, would it be okay with you if I just did like, I don't know, a 3-hour concert? I mean, nobody would want that and no executive would approve that, would they? And now they're just like screaming full-throated and we know where it's going. This is going to be a 3-hour concert. And it's amazing that she has that kind of connection, that self-awareness and understanding with her audience. And I'm not even a Swiftie. I'm like, Taylor killing us. Is this going to be a 3-hour concert? Are you kidding me? Of course it's going to be. And all the stories and the wardrobe changes that she has really just like tell the story. And I'm going to just keep on the concert stuff. I've only been to less than 5 concerts in my life, Ryan. A friend of mine had invited me to a Justin Bieber concert. This is before he went crazy, I think. And it's like a peak Bieberdom, everybody's a believer. And I'm like, okay, I don't know. And I start to watch the story that's being told from beginning of the concert to the end. In the very beginning, first of all, girls were screaming their head off, and he hadn't even been on the stage, and they were doing this for 30 minutes long. It was so loud in there, I had to buy earplugs or get earplugs from somebody because I can't believe how loud it's going to get in there once he steps on stage. So he knows how to build up the anticipation. So don't start on time. It's going a little crazy. And then they start to hear a little bit of music, and now they take it to level 3. And it's like, okay, we were just at level 2. We're now at level 3. And there's a little kind of a concert video thing. and there's something about clouds and angels, and there's this giant LED wall that parts, and with the blinding light from behind and all the smoke effects, and here's this angel with wings appearing in a white jumpsuit or something like that, and he cables in. He flies onto the long runway and he lands. I think somebody comes up on stage, pulls the wings off, and he starts the concert. Like, he is saying, I'm an angel sent from heaven to come have an experience with you. I'm not human. I'm beyond human. And by the end of the concert, it was a strip show. Like, he was shirtless, abs ripped, chest out, and he brings up the One Lonely Girl and he sings that song. It's bananas. So all of this is orchestrated. All of this is scripted, and it's beautiful storytelling. You don't have to be a fan of the artist or the music that he produces, but you've got to respect the love of production and understanding of what he's trying to do. He starts innocent and he becomes a little bit of a bad boy by the end of it, fully telling this narrative art. I think that's really beautiful to kind of witness. Now, I say all of this to you because I want you to be as mindful and as intentional with your storytelling and your branding. And we can start really simply. We can just look at how we appear. I've done this experiment in workshops, for in-person workshops, where I ask people, turn to one another, somebody you don't know, and remain silent. And then the other person just read you. When I say read you, like, make wild predictions about who they think you are, right? So they'll say something like, I think you're married. You probably have 2 kids. You probably drive like a red Corvette. And it looks like you went to a good school, but maybe not the best school. You like to party on the weekends. You probably are a sports person. They make wild guesses, and then they pause. And I instruct the person who's silent, do not say anything. Do not react. Do not emote. Because when you do, you signal to the other person, this is what I want to hear. And you unconsciously coach them to tell you what you want to hear. Don't do that. And then they switch. And then ask them some simple questions. And this is an exercise you do with your friends at a party or whatever you want. How many of you felt like the other person nailed you? Like, got 80 to 90% correct. And I wasn't sure what to expect. And Ryan, a lot of people raised their hands. The vast majority of the people raised their hands. And then how did that make you feel? And one person said, emotional. I'm like, why is that? They couldn't articulate it, but I said, was it like you felt seen? Maybe for the first time in a long time? Like, I think that's what that is. So I asked them, how can it be that someone who doesn't know you knows so much about you without words? And it's because all the little decisions that you make, or even the indecisions that you make, signal to the other person. And we're pretty good at figuring out people because we've evolved to determine if someone is a threat to us, if they're dangerous, or if they can be a friend or someone that we can really trust. And we have to put people into these 3 categories really quickly. So whatever it is that you've done, how you showed up today, is signaling to somebody what's going on about you. Now let's take it back to like home here. Let's bring this one home. How you appear, what you dress, how you wear your makeup, your eyeglass, how you comb your hair, how you hold yourself, your posture, it signals to people who you are. So you have to ask yourself this question. First of all, is that me? Is this who I am? Is this who I want to be? And if the answer is all yes, then fantastic. If not, let's start working on that together. Now, I'll tell you something. In the last, I think about 2 years, more so the last year, I've gone on this adventure of trying to understand technical streetwear, high-end luxury goods. I'm starting to put these things together. I didn't give myself permission to play in this space before, but just doing so, when I walk into places I've never been, to cities I've never been, conversations start with me where people ask me something like this. I'm curious, are you a designer? And I turn to them at a bar. Well, yes, I am. And the older lady says to me, a fashion designer? I said, not yet, but one day. And she turns and she says, I believe it. I'll look out for you. Isn't it really cool? Because I'm not a fashion designer today, but I'm working on that path. So I'm communicating to people where I'm going, not where I'm at. That's something that you want to think about.
From the spectacle to making people feel seen, the arc you just presented, I'm imagining some listeners might be like, how do I do that? Because I am not Taylor Swift. I am not Justin Bieber, and I am not Chris Doe.
Yes.
So how could someone without maybe a concert experience in their back pocket create that kind of spectacle, being seen and communicating to the world the way that you just said and making sure they understand where you're going? What are some of the more specific things that they could do? to communicate this way.
Let's pick a relatively versatile or boring industry that we all can relate to. Let's try one, Ryan, let's do this together and see what we can do. But pick a job, profession, or something that's kind of like every town has at least 100 of these types of people.
The first thing that came to mind, because some of our students do real estate and they sell houses. And it seems to me like that's a perfect fit for this kind of act.
I like that. Okay, let's say you're in the real estate space and you're an agent or a broker or something like that, and you show homes, okay? Let's just go there. The first question I would ask you is, who are your parents? Where were you born? And what does that say about you? Because we're going to trade on social capital. There's social equity here. So if you're from Guatemala, if you're from the Philippines, if you're from Hawaii, if you're from Chicago, there's things that people know and assume about you. So let's just say you come from a Midwestern small town raised by fairly conservative parents. And the way I would embrace my identity is I would buy like vintage secondhand suits with like interesting patterns that are very retro. And retro is kind of in anyways, right? And I would make sure that the suit or dress really complement my body, my shape. So if you have long legs, show off your long legs. If you have a muscular build, show that off. Like accentuate what you have. And so if I'm imagining my mind, like I might even go a little retro with my hair, maybe from the 30s or the 40s and wear kind of more statement piece eyewear or jewelry. And I would put myself together so that when I meet somebody, they're going to say, whoa, every other broker has a dark colored suit and a red or blue tie with a white shirt. And you're coming in with plaid or some other kind of pattern and print. You're still sharp. You're dressing for the job, but you totally stand out. You're different. And maybe when you meet people, you kind of bring a little bit of that culture with you. So I don't know what people do in the Midwest, but let's just say like you're really into pecan pies or something. And when you come to the open house, you greet them at the door with your kind of Midwestern charm and hospitality. And when they come into the home, there's the smell or the scent of fresh baked pecan pies. And I don't know what else there. It might be like an iced coffee or iced tea or something. And you're bringing a little bit of that story. And you write some handwritten notes, and on the back of it is like these old vintage postcards that you found in an old swap meet from where you're from. I think that'd be kind of cool. So that each person, you kind of thank them in your own way. There's probably a couple other things that you can do, but I think what we're trying to do in most cases is to discard everything that makes us different, and we try just to fit in with what the pack is doing. And you disappear in the pack. There's safety in the pack, but you kind of just disappear. So by changing a few things like that, I think all of a sudden you stand out, and it's not superficial. It's like, I'm letting you know a little bit about who I am. And here's the thing. Some rich Midwesterner comes in the room. It's like, I'm getting a vibe about you. Where are you from? And you say, oh, I don't know. I'm from Chicago. And like, me too. Which parts? And you talk about it. And then there's this connection. It's like, you know what? Let me tell you something. This house isn't for me, but I'd like to work with you. What else you got? You're in the door. You created a connection. You're saying, this is who I am. If you share similar values, beliefs, opinions, tastes, there's a connection there. And I think we're desperately looking for this, Ryan, because it's just as communicated to as we are in the world, as connected as we are. I think the feeling of being isolated and not being seen is higher than it's ever been. So give them what they want.
I really want to dig more into that, but I also want to ask about artificial intelligence, because one of the things that I did before I met with you today is I went and I played with Dobot, which is one of the perks of being a Future Pro member. It doesn't hold a candle to the real live you, obviously, but it's very useful. And I want to know how we can leverage AI to actually enhance our personal brand and the tasks that come with that, but also what we might need to look out for. Because, for example, I asked it about ROT and it gave me the wrong answer. And I was like, oh, everything else on this, and I did a lot of testing, everything else was 100% spot on right. Yeah, there are some kind of drawbacks to leveraging these tools that aren't quite ready. And they will be ready soon because it's the worst that it will ever be, as they say. But how do you leverage AI?
Right. I find that if you give it some clues as to what ROT stands for, it will fill in the rest.
So user error then?
Well, not so much user error. It's like if you think about the vastness of what it knows, what it's connected to, there can be many different things. So you have to give it a little bit of clue. So when people complain about AI being not intelligent, like artificial stupidity, I think that what they don't understand is the quality of the input affects the quality of the output. So two monkeys can use AI and get no results, but a curious child who can communicate what they want can have tremendous results. And so that's a clue, I think. I think what AI is the promise of helping you be more yourself. And this is kind of an important thing. So let's say you're not a very good writer and you ask it to write for you. Well, it's going to produce a pretty bad piece of writing. But if you're a systems designer, if you're like hyper optimized in how you live, it will help you become more optimized and more systemized in terms of creating processes for you. And so I think we take a task, any task, and then we say, well, we do this, because then we have to kind of instruct it as to what we want and how we want it done, and so that it can do a better job for us. So let's make this super tangible again. How do we use AI in our normal workflow? You can either tell me something that you're working on, Ryan, or maybe something that you hear a lot of in terms of the people in your community.
Making sure that we have quality LinkedIn posts.
Okay. What is quality LinkedIn posts for you? Like, what does that mean?
Something that will get the kind of engagement and metrics like views, etc., that could qualify as higher than normal.
So what we're talking about is in terms of engagement and the metrics, those are the byproduct of you doing something that is good. So I think instead of saying like, we want high engaging posts, which he doesn't know what to do with, it's like, I know what makes a good post. Here's an example. Help me do this consistently across multiple topics I want to speak on. You have to kind of instruct it what you think a good post is, because there's no universal definition of a good post. Quite literally, I believe this. If I gave you what I thought was going to be a good post and you shared it on your timeline, it might perform a little bit better than what you do, but it's not going to perform the same way that it's going to perform for somebody like me, because I've shown up as this very specific type of person. So when I post something, I think people are like, yes, of course he's going to say that. Of course he believes that. And we're showing up because we want to hear more of that. So what Ryan writes about is going to be very different. Conversely, if you gave me one of your posts and I write, or I share it on my feed, I think it'll perform better, but it won't perform as well as something that I've written. Now, this is not always true, because on Instagram, some of my guest posts are my highest performing posts. And I just do a little bit of curation and art direction there so that it feels and sounds like something that would fit on my feed. So when you write a post, what have you identified as maybe one or two things that are an indicator that this is going to be a good post? Do you know?
Well, we just talked about rot. So I think that can indicate, if it's done correctly, can indicate that it's going to be a good post if I've really taken that framework and applied it to what I want to communicate.
Yes. So when we talk about ROTS, in case people don't know, it's a copywriting framework. It's for results or objections, and then the timeline or time frame. So what is the result that you promise? What are the objections that somebody might have about you or this idea, and how long will it take? So the classic example is learn how to speak Spanish in 2 weeks, even if you've never spoken a foreign language before. That includes all the components. Now, we know that from a headline that's going to have a higher probability of getting good click-through rate. But then now the goods have to come. You have to be able to say something that's meaningful, something that's not true but useless, which is a lot of what people post. Like, yeah, I know. I'm not a dummy. What do you want me to do with this? So I think the kinds of posts that work better are ones that you share from your own life experience. One where you say, like, here's how I did something versus here's how you should do something. It's way more credible. It's way more relatable. So the first rule here is help me write this post so that it is more personal and focuses on something that I've experienced. Instead of writing it for me, ask me questions so that I can be led towards writing something like that. So I think what people want to do is they just want to create a magic button that they do very little effort and they get these great things coming out of it. And it's scary, the level of effort you have to make small and the kind of results that you can get really big. Imagine if you made a big effort, what the size of the output would be. And I think that's the thing that most people miss. So if you say, you know what, I'm going to tell a story about a time in which I grew up, ask me a few questions, and based on the answers that I give you, reshape this into a LinkedIn post that follows copywriting guidelines and has a strong headline following the ROT formula, and you have to tell it what it is, with a good payoff at the end. And it's excellent. And then I'll ask you, so what do you want to talk about, Ryan? And you want to say, well, there's a story about when I was 12 and I had an experience with an ice cream cone or something. And this happened and this happened. And it will ask you more questions. And when it's ready, it should be able to rewrite it for you. That's how I would use AI.
Excellent. So my mistake was thinking it was too much like Christo, I think, because when I'm using my paid subscription of ChatGPT, that's right, I definitely invest that kind of time. But whenever I came to Dobot, I was like, this is Dobot. This is it. This is the experience. I'm excited. And I did not invest that kind of time and energy. So I think that's really good advice for everyone, providing context, providing role, providing as much information into the AI system to get the best results out of it. Do you have any other advice for working with AI and improving our personal branding outcomes?
Yeah, I mean, you have to present me a problem, and then I will tell you the application or the things that I've used personally. And if I don't have a great answer, I'll try to get you one. But one of the reasons why you can't just assume Dobot's going to write posts for you is because what it's trained on. It's not trained as a social media copywriting machine. It's trained on business bootcamp course material. It's trained on the things I've written in a pocket full of dough. And so maybe the next iteration of it, I can ask it to read all my LinkedIn posts and to find common themes and threads and to be able to help people in our community write better posts, not by writing it for them, but by asking them certain questions such that when they're done, they have a higher performing post. We can work on that. That's not hard to do.
I really love what you shared about storytelling. So I'd like to circle back to that.
Okay.
And I'd like you to tell us how you might leverage AI for telling a personal story that would align with your personal brand.
So what I'll do first is I'll talk about how you do it as a human, and then we'll start to figure out how we can use AI, because AI is not a magic box. Not yet. Maybe it will be. Which is, first, do you know who you are? And can you summarize who you are in a succinct 2 to 3 word combination so that when people meet you, they're like, yep, you're that guy. So I had many 2 or 3 word combinations. I've used some of them in the introduction, and I'll tell you what they are. And I refer to this as the 2-word brand. And it could be a 1-word brand. It could be a made-up word. But the idea is to communicate something. And I'd like to be able to juxtapose 2 words such that the combination of 2 words creates this hybrid new meaning that becomes super specific and unique to you. So if you use 2 words that are very similar, like creative genius, it's like, well, geniuses are creative. And I guess some creatives are geniuses. So that doesn't really do anything. Or spiritual healer. It's like, that's not really a juxtaposition of 2 different ideas. So mine, or several of mine, is loud introvert, serial dreamer, or serial entrepreneur, recovering graphic designer, charming razor blade, a caring snob. So we try to put those 2 things together. And many of those were given to me by our community or business Buddha. So you want to be able to come up with your own unique combination, because when you're introducing yourself, they don't have a lot of time or mental capacity to remember who you are and what you do. So if you introduce yourself as a loud introvert, people are like, wait, what? What does that mean? So there's this pattern interrupt. Like, I know what an introvert is and I know what it means to be loud, but how does an introvert become loud? I'm like, well, let me tell you. I've learned how to leverage social media so that despite my lack of social skills, I can have a footprint in the world. I can make impact. And they're like, wow, tell me more about that. And so the conversation continues on and on. So once you know what your 2 or 3 word brand is, and what we recommend to people is to figure out what your shadow words are. Because as we've talked about this earlier, it is better to be relatable, to be vulnerable, to be authentic to who you are. And what people tend to do is they tend to focus all on their strengths. They just want to talk about how great they are. You can do that, but it's really boring. So if you start from a place of true vulnerability, a word that brings up some kind of emotional pain for you, shame, guilt, anxiety, frustration, something, and you start with that word. You don't want to end on that word because it's not very positive. Like if you're an alcoholic or you have substance abuse, you just don't want to be like, hey, I'm Chris. I suffer from substance abuse, or I'm an alcoholic. People are like, okay, got some demons that you got to work through, huh? So what we do is we add a transformer word to your shadow word. The transformer word catalyzes your shadow word. So an introvert in many ways is not seen as this thing that people aspire to become. Extroverted, yes. Gregarious, yes. A public speaker, yes. Charismatic, yes. So we start with introvert and we say like, well, I can be a loud introvert, and that embraces a very unique position for me, and that works for me. So that's a transformer word. Phyllis Strader, who's part of our community, as you know, she has an excellent one. She calls herself the brand mother because she's a little bit older. She's had a couple of career changes. So you might say she's too old, like a grandmother, but she talks about branding. So she's the brand mom or the brand mother, and her clients are brand babies. And that's how it works. And she can own that position. And if you're not an older person, you can't really say that. And that's what's really cool about this. And if you don't work in branding, you can't claim this either. So she's the brand mother. That works. Now, when you go and tell a story, you have an infinite number of stories. What story should you tell? Well, the way I look at it is loud introvert is the punchline to every story. So when I think of a story, it goes on its arc. There are challenges, there's trials and tribulations, but when it lands, I want the person to think, and that's why you're a loud introvert. Okay. So I share many stories and I write from this place. And I'll give you the example. The example I will often point to is some people know this, but I've won an Emmy before. And when I got the news that I was going to win an Emmy, it was super exciting, yet terrifying to me because it meant that I was going to have to give a 30-second acceptance speech. And when you win one, they tell you all kinds of things. Be short, be pithy, be atypical, be different, because that's what will make the cut. When they say making the cut, they mean edit for television, because this is a multi-hour long thing, but what you see on TV is just a fraction of what you experience in real life. So for weeks leading up to the ceremony, I'm like going crazy. I think my mom, I think my wife and my children, and it's all just boring stuff you've heard 1,000 times before. And I'm losing sleep over this. I'm losing weight, Brian. The day of, I think I've written something, I've memorized it, but I'm rewriting it in my mind the entire time. So I'm sitting in the darkened auditorium in the Kodak Theater. That's what it was called back then. I was like really kind of just in knots. My knees were knocking. And my wife turned over to me. She's like, what is that shaking? My God. And she puts her hand on my knee. She goes, honey, calm down. All the chairs in this aisle were feeling your shaking here. I'm like, it's easy for you to say. And just a few minutes later, she goes, I think that person's looking for you. I'm like, what person? I'm trying to enjoy the show here. And there was a page walking down the aisleway, whispering to each side of the aisleway, my name. And they were like, Krista. I'm like, oh my God. And I'm like 14 seats out. And I could see this guy moving up. And I'm like, oh, that's me. And he's already gone past me. So I'm like, oh, excuse me. I like move past people. Sorry, excuse me. I'm just like dancing past them. I'm like, excuse me, sir. Are you looking for somebody? Like, yes, I'm looking for Christo. I'm like, that's me. And they're like, oh my God. And his face lit up, elated and also kind of terrified. I'm like, what's going on? He goes, we've been looking for you. You're not sitting in the area that you're supposed to be sitting in. That's our fault because we moved you over here. We don't have time to do this the proper way. Normally, I would take you around the back so no one sees you. We're actually going to have to cut across the aisle in front on the stage across everybody. Now, keep in mind, Ryan, I'm an introvert. I don't want to be in front of people. I'm already kind of out of my mind trying to think about this talk or the speech, this acceptance speech I want to give. Now I'm going to be zipping past all the people. I'm wearing a brand new Dolce & Gabbana suit, brand new Dolce & Gabbana shoes, and I think you know this, but those shoes are slippery. They had the leather wooden bottoms. And I was like, we're moving pretty fast. I was thinking, whatever you do, do not fall. Do not trip in front of everybody. You probably tear your suit because it is so tight to my body that if I eat a big meal, the buttons are going to pop. It's a very tailored suit. So we're zipping by and we're just like hauling ass. And I look to my left as we're about to get onto the stage. I see all the beautiful, famous people. I'm like, shoot, those are the famous people. We're just like artists and designers in the back kind of thing. We get up on stage, go behind the curtain, and there's a long line of people ready to accept their award. And I'm now breathing heavy. I think I'm starting to sweat. Not because of that movement, but because like it's getting real right now. Heart palpitations and all. And the guy in front of me looks disgusted. He's like, can you believe it? I'm like, no, what? What's going on? They're running long, so they're not going to let us say our thing. I was like so just overwhelmed with joy and relief. The kind of pressure went from like a 13 to a 2. And he goes, this is unacceptable. I'm going to have a word with the producer. I was like, oh no, my heart can't take this, Ryan. It can't take this. It's like scared out of my mind, relieved, and back to being scared again. So I'm like, okay, what am I going to say? What am I going to say? Let's work this out. He comes back. I'm like, well, what happened? I'm like, what does that mean? He shakes his head. We're not going to be able to say anything. They say, just get up on stage, hold up the statue, and get off the stage and hand the statue to the next person. It's like clockwork how this works. What people don't know is they only have a few statues backstage. The one that you actually get is somewhere else. It's too much of a logistical nightmare. And so I go up there, awkwardly hold up that statue, and I don't know what I was doing because it's just the weirdest arc in my body. I look like a serpent arced over to the side, and I hold up this statue and get off stage. And as excited as it was to win that statue, I just want to let people know that the story behind the story is that I'm frightened out of my mind. I was relieved I didn't have to say anything. I'm the kid in school when they said oral book report. I was just already like ready to die. So the story ends there. Sometimes I'll ask people like, what is something that you've experienced where you thought you were going to die because of embarrassment or to be in front of people or to be the center of attention? And how did you overcome it? Or did you? And that's usually the post. And that post is one of my highest performing posts with over 8,000 reactions to it. So instead of talking about winning a statue, congratulations to the team and all the generic stuff, or the interest in hiring us, if you want to win one of these things, whatever, it was really just a personal story. And I want people to walk away thinking, that dude is weird. He is a socially awkward mother effer. And that is landing on the punchline, which is I'm a loud introvert. So the stories that you tell should reinforce how you define your personal brand. Now, how you get AI to help you with this, that's a whole nother episode, I believe.
Absolutely. What's one core action that you think is the most important action someone can take to grow their personal brand?
I think you have to get in touch with yourself. Who are you? What makes you you? This is critical. This is a lifelong question. So depending on how old you are, the answer might be very different than if you're a little bit older. And this is a wonderful place. This is one of the advantages of growing older. You have perspective, you have experience, and you have a lens, and possibly you have an attitude like, I don't give an F anymore, and I'm okay with that. So what we have to do is we have to excavate. We have to remember who we were. So travel back in your mind. Somewhere between the ages of 4 and 7 is who you were. Everything else in society wound up stripping away those things about you. You could have been into cars. You might have designed clothing or made bookmarks, or you've done weird, interesting things. Maybe you're really into sports, or maybe you're the kid who would walk up in his underwear and hold a wooden spoon and stand in front of the TV while your parents are trying to watch some sports thing and pretend to be the sports announcer. Maybe that's you. And if that's you, you need to start to uncover that and start to bring that to the surface instead of burying it. It's a journey of remembering who you are. And there's some prompts that you can do that you can use to do this. I've already given you some. Who are your parents? Where are they from? And where are you from? And what does that say about you? And then the next question I want you to think about is, what is the defining moment in your life in which something happened in which for you, the world is never the same after? It could be the passing of someone that you care about. It could be an exciting moment like the birth of a child, or you getting accepted into a program, or being mentored by somebody, or receiving some kind of acknowledgement, something like that. Your life is no longer the same. That's a critical moment in your life, and you need to understand why is that such a critical moment, and you need to be able to tell that story. So what I do is I work on a bunch of prompts to help people to remember better.
I want another prompts now.
Here's another prompt. Quickly scan through your photo album. You have tens of thousands of photos on your cloud-based photo album. Every time you see a picture that makes you smile, makes you angry, makes your heart skip a beat, there's a story in that photo. Because stories or memories are just emotions and stories together. Those three things are intertwined. You can't have a memory without a story and an emotion. And a story without emotion is not a memory. Is that we're looking for that. It stirs something within you. And you can basically have endless stories if you just grab all the images and either add them to a special folder or just drag them into a folder on your desktop called stories and just dump them in there. And I have a folder full of images that anytime I'm stuck, I just go in there, I see one, I post that, and then I remove that image from the folder. That becomes its own story. So you can do that.
And I know that a lot of the people who are listening or watching definitely had emotional resonance with all the different parts of what you shared today about personal branding. Where can they find you online if they're looking for you?
Okay, you can find me on almost all social platforms. I'm at the Chris Do, and Do is spelled D-O. And if you want to find out more about any of the programs that we do, maybe you've received value from us before and you're like, you know what? I've not exercised my end of the bargain. I've not reciprocated the value. Go to thefutur.com. Future is spelled F-U-T-U-R. There's a success quiz there that you can take. And it's a pretty awesome quiz that one of our education directors, Stephanie Owens, put together. And just take it. At the end of it, you can get 1 of 4 PDFs, and it's going to tell you exactly what you need to do, including all the resources. So highly recommend that.
And a beautiful demonstration of an effective call to action in a personal brand as well. Was there anything that you wanted to be asked today or wanted to cover about personal branding that maybe I haven't had a chance to ask about? Is there something really just top of mind based on what we've discussed?
Well, I don't think there's anything you didn't ask, but I want to make sure I'm clear on my end, Ryan. If we can just magically float outside of our body into the astral plane and look back on ourselves, what do we see? Who is this person? And where is this person going? And if we can see it objectively like that, then we can zoom back into our own body and say, okay, now we need to make different decisions with our lives, how we present ourselves, and what it is that we're supposed to be doing. I believe in this quote, and I think it's a great place to end on this. And it's a quote from Picasso, that the purpose of life is to discover your gift, and the meaning of life is to give it away. And that's what I want everybody to do. Discover what your gift is, and then learn how the best way you can give it away.
A great description of personal branding. Discover the gift, give it away. Chris, again, thank you so much for taking the time and for your generosity.
My pleasure, Ryan. Thanks for having me on the show.